So good afternoon and welcome. My name is Eric Estes. I'm the Vice President for Campus Life. Thank you so much for joining. And we hope that this finds you and your families safe and well. Welcome to today's Healthy Brown webinar. It's one of a series over the next week and a half. Today's focus is on housing and dining. Today's webinar will be recorded and then it will be posted publicly so that people who were not able to join us can go and watch and learn from our experiences together. We hope that you've been joining the webinars that have happened already. And again, we hope that you will join the ones in the future. We realize that the webinar format has its advantages and its limitations. We thank you for your patience. We've chosen it because of the number of people who want to attend. We want as many people to attend as possible. And also we want to be able to get to as many questions as possible. And there were a lot of questions that were submitted in advance, and we thank you. We look forward to starting there. The ability to try and ask as many of those questions. There were many that were in groupings of similar questions and topics. So we will start there with those questions for our panelists. And I'd also encourage you to use, and I see people are doing it already, which is great, the Q&A function. And we will spend some time later in the webinar going to some of those questions that you're submitting in real time. So thank you again. I encourage everyone to continue visiting the Healthy Brown website, where we continue to put the most current and relevant information. And so we hope that you will be able to use that as a valued resource. And so now I'd like to start by having our panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start with AVP and Dean of Students, Corin Bakkegaard.
Thank you, Eric. I would just want to echo, really glad being here with everyone today. I know there are many things about our housing assignment process and our configuration that need to change for the current circumstances we're in, but we really want to help be able to explain today many of the things that are staying the same, that are very cherished about the residential experience at Brown, and to make sure that we can really outline the ways that all of our decision-making and planning has been informed by the best public health principles. But so glad that you can join and be with us here today.
Director Barboza.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm George Barboza. I'm the Director of Dining Programs at Brown University. I'd like to welcome all of our participants and look forward to the questions that will come about dining and what dining looks like for fall 2020 and beyond. And we hope to be able to answer all questions and concerns that the participants may have. So again, welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Mienser. I'm the Director of Residential Operations at Brown, and thank you for sharing in the webinar.
Hello, my name is Rick Rudnick, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I am the Associate Director for Associate Dean and Director of Residence Education. And I'm excited that you're here, and we've been spending a lot of time investing in our residential experience. So we hope to be able to answer all of your questions for your students who will be living with us in the fall.
Great, and again, thank you to our panelists and to all of you for being here. Director Barboza, I thought we could start with you on a question for dining. You know, on the one hand, grab and go sounds sort of somewhat self-explanatory, but it's very new for most of our students, and it's probably more complicated than that. And so I was wondering, a lot of the questions are asking, you know, what will grab and go dining look like? You know, how will that work? You know, how will that be safe for students and safe for dining workers who everyone cares a lot about as well? How will that work? Because usually dining is all you can eat. And then also, how will you make sure that in a grab and go kind of system that the food isn't repetitive, that it's you know, different and you know, appealing each time?
Sure. So thank you for the question, Vice President Estes. So essentially, our model of grab and go here at Brown as we enter into the fall we will be offering restaurant quality meals. Essentially, there'll be a choice of 3 or 4 different entrees on a daily basis. Always a meat or a fish protein, a vegetarian, a vegan. It will, and the appropriate starch along with that. It also, on a daily basis, it will have a salad of the day, dessert of the day, beverages that you have multiple choices for beverages. We also have the meal will also contain choices of different proteins that have add-ons every day. So we will have small side containers of grilled chicken, tofu, beans, boiled eggs. And as the students enter, socially distanced naturally, of course, all of our units will reflect the best safe practices from the CDC. So they'll come in in 6-foot intervals, they'll approach the line, and they will actually choose the meal if they want. It's not going to be, they will be prepackaged, but you will all have the ability to say, I want the vegetarian entree, I want this entree. Although they're all packaged, the staff will hand you, through a barrier, will hand you your meal, and you'll have a bag to put everything that you would like to have in that particular meal in that bag, and then exit out. So it's one way in, it's one way out, so we don't have crossing paths in the dining hall for safety measures. The chefs have been working diligently throughout the summertime to be sure that we have a lot of variety in meals. And so the goal is you wouldn't see the same entree more than once over a 2 or 3 week period. And so that's how we plan to really address variety and flexibility for our student population. The other thing is that, that sort of model is operating out of Josiah's, the Verney Willie, and the Shop Refectory. We have also decided to maintain Andrews Commons as sort of as a more retail model. It is going to be, we will be implementing the Get Food app this fall. So Andrews will be all pre-ordered. You will need to download the app. You can order your food the time you want to pick it up, and you'll just arrive at the unit and pick up your food. But that unit will also, some of the more popular and traditional retail offerings like pho and pizza and burgers and different kind of nice bowls. So that's what that is what the dining model would look like as we open up for the fall. And again, our goal is as we get further along to stop beginning to implement in-house dining. But we really need to get through, we think, the month of September and maybe part of October before we start seating in-house. But that is our goal before the, soon into the fall semester. We hope that we can implement some in-person dining.
Great, thank you so much, Director Barboza. You mentioned, and in your answer, there was a real sense of there being some choice involved. And you also mentioned vegan meals. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more. There were a lot of questions from students around, if I need a kosher meal, or if I need to eat gluten-free, or if I have certain types of dietary circumstances related to allergies. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So we continue to offer a kosher plan. So at every meal, there will be kosher offerings if you choose to be on the kosher halal plan. That will not change for fall 2020. As far as allergies, the best practice, and we emphasize this with all students, if you have any type of food allergy, we have a registered dietitian. We will continue with that practice that you should reach out and do one-on-one with our registered dietitian. And if need be, the service we will provide is we will provide separate meals apart from what the grab-and-go entrees look like. And they will be packaged separately. They will be prepared separately in a separate part of the kitchen, so there isn't any cross-contamination. There's a process, registering with SAS now and working with our dietitian, but rest assured, we will provide those meals to students who require that service in a safe manner.
Great, thank you so much. I think we'll turn to housing now, and we'll go back and forth between housing and dining. There have been a lot of questions pre-submitted around housing assignments. And clearly this is not a sort of typical housing lottery type of situation. And I know that has created a lot of questions about how assignments will be carried forward. And I was hoping that Dean Bakagard and maybe Director Menser, you could talk a little bit about how Res Life is currently working on housing assignments.
Sure. Director Mansour, would you like to take that question?
Thank you, Vice President Estes and Dean Bacard. I appreciate the question. We have had to make some modifications to our housing assignment process, and that is indeed because of the fact that there was a de-densification of the campus, and all based on public health and safety rationale as it relates to the per person, per bathroom capacity. As a result of that, the lottery process that typically takes place is now being done in the form of the housing questionnaire, which the students have received and will be filling out. This will allow for us to at least gauge some preferences about what their needs are and where they'd like to be. Additionally, some questions that we've received on the housing process is what's going to happen to the pre-assigned process. And students went through a pre-assignment process through the SEAS, which formerly SEAS, which is now the Student Accessibility Services Department. And we are definitely going to be able to meet all of those assignments in a new assignment. Additionally, we have pre-assignments that were done through Greek and Program House and special interest. We are working through those, and those will also be considered, and we should be able to meet those assignments on campus as well. The students who have completed the housing preference, once we have all of that information, we will be able to then begin our actual assignment process. And your assignments will be received no later than August 10th. These will be based on what you had sent forward at that time. One of the things I also want to bring up is that we do have the availability also of different properties or different halls that are being made available to different class levels. So it's important that when you see a certain building or not see a certain building, that is based on the fact that that's what's available to your particular class year.
Great. Thank you so much. There are also a lot of questions, both pre-submitted and also looking in the Q&A being submitted now about off-campus permission. We were just talking about assignments on campus. We know there's the long-standing university 6-semester on-campus requirement. You know, each year a certain number of students are released off campus. I was hoping that you could talk about how that's being handled this year, what have been some of the opportunities and challenges associated to off-campus permission this year.
So the students did go through an off-campus permission process in the fall as well as in the spring. And there were a number of students who received off-campus permission during that time. Additionally, as a result of that process, there were students who were on a wait list from those original processes. Those students were released this week, and we have now developed a additional off-campus housing wait list that is through the housing questionnaire process that the students are going through now. As of right now, we don't have any timeline as to when the students on the current off-campus permission wait list will be released. We are awaiting all of the information from the housing questionnaires, which are due on July 15th. Once we have that information, we can better assess where approvals can be granted for off-campus approval, if any at all. I think that there definitely needs to be the expectation that there might not be additional permissions that are granted. In addition to that, the juniors are students who are signing up for those off-campus housing permissions. Sophomores are not eligible to be on the off-campus housing wait list.
There's one thing I wanted to add, if that's okay, Vice President Estes, regarding to the off-campus situation. We just want to be sure that we underscore that the students who have received off-campus permission, as Tracy had mentioned, already have that information, have that permission, either because they received that release in the fall, or they received that in the spring, or the last group of students who were recently notified on Tuesday. Any other students who are still covered by the 6th semester residency requirement should be mindful that if you haven't been granted permission for off-campus housing, you are still charged the housing fee. So we do want to make sure that we advise students to be aware of that, not to sign leases prior to receiving off-campus permission explicitly, and to make sure that we underscore that at this time we do and are maintaining a wait list for additional students who would like that approval. None of those decisions will be made or communicated before July 16th. They'll be made on a rolling basis, and there have already been somewhat more than, or in the neighborhood of 20% more students released off campus already for the coming academic year than we normally exempt from the residency requirement. The other thing I want to note for students who already do have approval to live off campus, to be advised that there is a city ordinance that we suspect is going to be more strictly enforced in the coming academic year, that there can be no more than 3 students who are in a dwelling together. We're working on getting some specific information to help send that clarification out to the students who have already received off-campus permission, so they can be sure, as they're confirming their leases, those students who have the permission, that they can be sure to be living within the confines of that relatively new city ordinance.
Great, thank you so much, Dean Backergard. I was wondering if I could ask a follow-up to the discussion of on-campus assignments, off-campus permission. There has been a lot of discussion of the word remote. And I think there may be some conflation of remote study and remote living. And I'm wondering if you, maybe Dean Backergard, could talk a little bit more. I know that there's an FAQ on it, but just the opportunity for people here to learn a bit more about the distinction.
Sure. And I think one of the challenges is this is a new concept for us and for our students, that this is the first time we're entering into the academic year with a category and a choice for remote study. So all students, all undergraduate students, do need to complete that fall 2020 location of study form by 11:59 on July 15th. And when students enter the form, there are 5 possible locations of study, and students will only see displayed to them the locations of study that are available to them. So as an example, students whose permanent address is within 30 miles of the Brown campus are eligible for commuter as their location of study, but that won't display to students whose permanent address is not within that range, because that's not an applicable location and status for them. So students who are living in on-campus housing, and we may want to have a quick moment where we talk about the Brown leased off-campus housing, which we are considering on-campus housing since it's coming through the residential life assignment and billing process. So there are some off-campus properties that are in fact categorized as on-campus properties. But students who are going to be coming to campus, who are going to be on campus, need to either be in that on-campus category because they are in on-campus managed or owned housing, or they have off-campus or commuter permission. Any students who are interested in a remote location of study, that is not in the Providence area. Remote study is a category of study that says that student is not coming to campus. They are not making use of in-person resources. They're not attending class in person. And that remote location of study is intended for students who are fully outside of the Providence area and are intending to take all of their classes and all of their Brown experience and interactions remotely. So there is not a compatibility for remote study and being in the Providence area as a category of location of study. However, any student who wants to take some or all of their classes remotely in a remote environment can do so. So it's possible that we might have a student who is living on campus but is choosing to take many of their classes online, but that is different from being in a remote location of study.
So thank you, Dean Backergott. If you'd like me to then speak to the Brown leased off-campus property. Due to the de-densification of campus, Brown was able to acquire additional beds off campus, but still within close proximity to the university. And with the exception of one property, the majority of these properties are in the Jewelry District area. They are priority to the seniors and juniors. They are on a shuttle route. There'll be furnished apartments, which do have private kitchens, and they're anywhere from 1, 2, and 3 bed units. Additionally, there are requirements that these buildings may have as far as rules and regulations that might be above the typical rules and regulations students on campus would see, so that would be communicated to them prior to as well. One of the other things I do want to point out is, as Dean Bakker had said, I want to reiterate it again, that the off-campus permission wait list is the wait list for non-university leased housing. So you do not need to select wait list if these are properties that interest you.
Great, thank you both for that really helpful information. Let's go back to dining, and Director Barboza, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, there were a lot of questions about the meal plans this year because they've changed a bit. I think a number of the questions were hoping for just a general overview of what's changed and what are the implications for different groups of students, first and second years versus juniors and seniors. Could you walk through what the changes have been? What do students need to know most about those dining plans?
Yeah, so essentially we have modified our food, our meal plan offerings, and really based around capacity issues and how we had to convert all of our units to sort of all board plan mostly. So we have a limited number, a 20, a 14, a 7. We also offer the Kosher halal plan, and we are offering an off-campus meal plan. Freshmen are mandated to be on the 20-week meal plan. That has not changed. Sophomores have a choice between the 20 or the 14. And then third and fourth years can choose or not choose any plan, as well as off campus. So if you have received off campus permission, you're not required to be on a meal plan, although you could choose any one of the meal plans that we offer. So essentially that's how, those are the limitations, if there are any limitations, really between first and second years, they have mandated to be on a meal plan. And what we've done is actually added, we've removed the flex plans, and essentially flex plans were sort of like dollar for dollar. You could go in and spend this much, but those were popular and traditional and mostly used in retail units, which will not be operating as such this fall because we just don't have the capacity. But we have some enhanced vending that will be happening across campus so that students will have access to food 24/7. And so what we've done in every plan is actually double the amount of flex points that would normally have come with these plans, so that once operations start closing, and we still haven't defined operational hours yet, but once Andrews and the Shopper Factory and the Josiah's closed, they'll have flex points. If they need something at 2 o'clock in the morning, they can, go to the vending machine and get a sandwich or salad or whatever that may be. So that's the major changes to the meal plan for fall 2020.
Thank you, Director Barboza. I wanted to just ask a quick couple of clarifying questions.
Sure.
So when you say retail units, if you could explain a little bit more about what you're referring to, and then, because there are a number of questions coming in through the Q&A, and then if you could also just clarify again that flex that typically might be used at some of those units that are closed then are meant to be used for vending and other types of new options?
Yeah. So, well, it's not that it's new. You could also use them in, so flex points are just that. Really, they're flex. What that means is, you can use them anywhere. That's essentially why we came with that title as flex. You can still use them in all of the units that will be open. If you choose a 7 meal plan, 7 meals a week, and you realize by Wednesday you've gone through all your meals and you still have 2 days left of the meal week, you could use your meal plan to come into Shopper Factory, to come in to Bernie Willie. Most students chose the flex plans that we used to offer because their balance would decline in what was a traditional retail operation. When I say traditional operation, that used to be the Blue Room, it used to be the Andrews Commons and Josiah's, and they were more a la carte operations. And so they were customized menus where you went in and ordered a burger or a pub bowl and all that. It was really customized to each student. We don't have the capacity to do that. And so it didn't make sense for us to then offer flex plans this year.
Great, thank you, Director Barboza. Director Mansour, I was wondering on the housing side, if you could talk a little bit about what move in and move out will look like. I know those who were on the health and safety webinar yesterday, that was a topic of conversation there. But for this group, just thinking about the logistics of housing and arriving and moving in, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that will look like in case someone wasn't on that webinar.
Thank you, Vice President Estes. The move-in is going to be staggered over 4 days, which is August 29th through September 1st. And that is based, of course, on wanting to be able to socially distance, public health and safety rationales. And students have had the opportunity on their housing questionnaire to rank their preferred days. We've done this because we'd like to be able to provide them with the knowledge of when they will be arriving on campus as soon as possible in order to be able to make travel plans. We will be able to confirm that date for them by July 24th. In addition to that, just to highlight some points, they'll be able to bring up to 2 family members. When they receive their assignments, they will be able to sign up for an actual move-in time and also register the family members who will be arriving with them. Some things that we'd like to point out that would be very helpful is if they could pack lightly and preferably send items ahead of time. When they arrive on campus, there'll be an unloading process, a key pickup process, guidance as to how to maneuver them to your room. And there will also be a communication that will be sent prior to move-in day that will definitely have many more arrival details and what they would need to expect and where exactly they should arrive, because we will have 10 separate locations throughout campus.
Great, thank you so much. There were a number of questions about what residential community will look like for students, and the question of pods came up. And the most frequent, I think, question was, could you define pods a little bit more? And then also, what's the purpose of a pod? Those were probably variations on those 2 questions being the most common. And then also there have been a number of questions both previously and in the Q&A around the role of the RPLs in the fall, and wondering if maybe Dean Bakkegaard, you wouldn't mind talking about the pods, and then maybe Dean Rudnick, you wouldn't mind maybe after talking a little bit more about RPLs and their importance and the role that they're going to play that might look a little different, but still be very important in terms of residential community.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about the pods. And I know many of the questions that have come here during our conversation through the Q&A have noted that the information that's available online right now about pods is not very specific. And one of those reasons is that we're going to be working actively with students when you're returning to campus and we're getting closer to your arrival date, and once students are on campus during what may be, depending on a student's origin of travel and where they're going to be living after they arrive in the Providence area, either what we're calling a quiet period, a 14-day period after testing and before students would be engaging in in-person classes, or some of the students who are moving off campus may be going into a more traditional quarantine. So we'll be sharing more information about that period of time when we get closer to students arriving at the end of August. After students are arriving, we're really going to be engaging quite a bit in a public health and education and prevention campaign. And we will need the robust participation of all members of our community, students, faculty, and staff alike, to have an understanding of what our shared commitments are and to understand what best practices are and to feel equipped and able to individually uphold all of those practices and to be able to help each other in doing so. So we're going to really work actively with students before their return and before they're really moving as freely on campus and going to in-person classes about those principles. And a part of that practice is going to be this notion of pods, where we want students to be able to identify organically and based on their circumstances, some small network of peers, a small group. And in the beginning, we would really imagine that to be about 5 students. So you and 4 friends who are going to be practicing many of the same practices in the same way, that you have a similar level of comfort and commitment to the ways that you will be engaging and moving around campus. So students are going to be forming those groups together, and we're going to be providing some help and support for students to identify who would be in their pod based on those shared practices and shared commitments. We really understand how important it's going to be in this time for students to be able to make connections and to feel safe and connected to others, even while we have to practice some of the physical distancing and other practices. We know students will want and need to have connections with others, and we want to be able to do that in a way that aligns with students' existing relationships and are going to be able to help them really be supportive. There will certainly be circumstances in which it makes sense for a student's pod to be connected to their residential environment. It may be that a group of students who live together in an off-campus house are going to be a pod with one another because they are sharing that living space. There may be other instances when pods are formed by students who don't necessarily live beside one another. But I want to underscore the point I think Tracy was making earlier as well. In the on-campus assigned housing, all of our students are going to have a private sleeping space, a private living space for their bedroom. And students will have a great deal of control over that environment and whether they would have anyone come into their room or not and who that would be. So students will have a lot of control over that environment. And we'll have good practices in place related to shared features like the bathrooms. So students will have the opportunity to identify the other people that they want to bring in more closely into their circle and who they want to have those kinds of closer physical connections with than they would simply who they're maybe attending class with or passing in a hallway or passing on campus as they're going to get food and engage in other activities. And I'll let Dean Rugnett have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the RPLs and community building on campus.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that overview. I'm excited to talk about the residential peer leaders. We call them RPLs. They're the most resources around students, helping to build a real sense of connection and belonging. I'm often impressed about the commitment of service that RPLs at Brown have, both to Brown as an institution, other students, and other worthy causes. Our focus is on being responsive and recognizing the urgency of situations in our facilities. We have a real strong desire to build a real sense of community, to make sure that our students are safe and that they all have a positive sense of well-being. Ways in which we're doing that with the RPL team is to make sure that we're giving them the best training. We've been preparing now since last February for what that will look like in doing skill development and bystander intervention, social justice education, conflict resolution, also that we can set our students up for success in their halls. And part of that is how we care for the RPLs. We want to make sure that they're safe. We want to make sure that social distancing guidelines inform the work that we do. And we want to make sure that they have the right personal protection equipment so that they can be safe. And we're also deploying some new technological resources to aid in the building of community and connectedness across the residence halls. We're really excited for the opportunity we're going to have to really enhance student learning here at Brown.
Thank you so much, Deans Bakkegaard and Rudnick. And I know that there will be a webinar next week on student activities and what community life will look like on campus, and I encourage people to join. But thank you particularly for lifting up and making visible the role of the residential peer leaders. Very much appreciate that. Director Barboza, I hear there are some plans for Chicken Finger Fridays at the VW. We got several questions about that and just how important that is to students. I realize in the middle of a pandemic, we all tend to sort of remember things that were important to us in even small ways. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about, plans for Chicken Finger Fridays.
Yeah. So as we move forward, one of the changes that will happen in the fall is for capacity reasons, and so Chicken Finger Fridays is a very, very popular day at, used to be a very popular day at the Vernie Willie Dining Hall. The model this year is Josiah's Vernie Willie and Shopper Factory will have mirrored menu. So students don't have to choose, I want to go to the VW on Friday because they have Chicken Fridays. So when we do offer chicken fingers, which we will, although it will not be every Friday, as it will be offered in at least 3 locations, minimally, so that they don't have to go up to the, the Pembroke side of the campus if there's classes down here near the Shopper Factory for chicken fingers. We understand clearly how popular it is. I think it will be in the rotation more often than some of the other menu options because it's so popular. And again, when it is, it'll be offered in all locations.
Great, thank you, Director Barboza. I would like to now turn to some of the questions that have been coming in through the Q&A function. I thought maybe Director Mansour, you or Dean Bakagard could talk about what visitor policy is going to look like. There have been some questions about people visiting, particularly residential spaces. And so hopeful that you could share a little bit more.
Do you want me to take this, Dean Bakagard? So within the residence halls, the students who reside in those halls will be the only ones with the access. There will not be an availability for students to have visitors into their particular halls. Only the students assigned to the on-campus residence can be visitors to others also in the on-campus residences.
Thank you. And as a follow-up question, someone has asked, what about friends visiting from, let's say, a college or university in Boston?
So the only, I want to clarify too, when students arrive to campus and are moving in that period at the end of August and the beginning of September, I want to clarify students will be able to bring 2 people with them as part of the move-in process to assist them. Those visitors or family members or friends, whoever students bring with them, will need to practice good hygiene practices of social distancing and wearing a mask the entire time that they're on campus. They can go into the residence halls to help drop off belongings, but that would be the extent of what we have in mind for those visitors coming on move-in day. After that, again, we want to make sure that students have as much control over their living environment as possible. So if a student wants to invite a guest over, the only guests that would be allowed or visitors in the residence halls would be other residential students, and that would be when they are specifically visiting someone that they've come to see. So students will only have swipe access to their own residence on campus, and they can have a guest over if they're with that guest, and that guest is another residential student on campus. But we would not have students who are coming into the residences either who live off campus or who are not members of the Brown community.
Thank you both very much for all of that information. There have been a number of questions about housing assignments and picking another person who you would like to live with or near. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about in a big picture way, we talked about assignments at the beginning, but how Res Life is thinking about that and some of the challenges of housing assignments this year that led to sort of that type of sort of question, and then students who might have others that they're interested in living in proximity to.
Thank you, Vice President Estes. So due to the de-densification of the campus and the fact that we're going to be housing in single rooms, just about half of the population that we would typically house, there wasn't really an opportunity for us to open up the possibility within the housing questionnaire of students to choose multiple neighbors, as we're calling them. And we're calling them neighbors because they won't be living in the same room as you, but they will be in close proximity. So we do still want students to have someone close by to them that they are very familiar with within their proximity. And this is all keeping in mind that because these are single rooms, every student will have their own private space as well. No one will be assigned together in any doubles. As it relates to the prior processes, and while there are many factors that are impacting the prior processes in the groups and the Greek and program housing, we are making every effort to mitigate the impact of these changes to all of the previous processes.
Great, thank you very much. There have been a number of questions, both pre, but also particularly in the Q&A about common spaces in residence halls. So kitchens and lounges, kitchens in particular. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
Thank you, Vice President Estes. I wasn't sure if Dean Bakagad was going to take that one. So at this point in time, the common area kitchens will not be available to students. So we do have a number of kitchens that are located within suites. And if you are assigned a suite, whether it's through the housing questionnaire process or if you are assigned that through the SAS accommodation process, the suite kitchens will be available to you and for use. The common area kitchens that are in the non-suite area of residence halls, though they won't be available, if there is, the water access will be available, as well as one of the things that we are providing is a microfridge in every student's room. So we are hoping that that will help mitigate the fact that the common area kitchens may not be available. And another thing to point out, and this does relate to the student accessibility services, that students with documented food allergies should be registered with student accessibility services so that they will be given a priority placement if a kitchen is in need.
And maybe I can say a few things about some of the other common areas, one of which would be the bathrooms. We're aware that that is a location where students will need to come into contact with those surfaces. And I want to underscore that that's really the reason for limiting access to the appliances in the common area kitchens, because right now our public health guidance is really to limit the contact with those shared surfaces. And if that guidance changes when we're through at midpoint in this semester or for spring semester, we will certainly revisit that. But at this time, we're making every effort to eliminate those kinds of contact with high contact shared surfaces. So for the bathrooms, there are a few things that we're doing. One is that with the reduced occupancy overall in the residence halls, there will be a smaller number of students who would be sharing any shared bathroom on that basis. We're also going to be setting expectations for occupancy limits for students who would be using a bathroom at the same time. So we will have, for example, a counter outside the bathroom door, and when students are entering the bathroom, can slide that over to indicate how many people are in the bathroom at a time. And that'll be based on how many students can safely physically distance if they are using a common bathroom at the same time. So we can maintain that practice. Facilities management talked a little bit yesterday in more detail during that webinar about the enhanced cleaning protocols. We're going to have disinfectant wipes available in all of the bathrooms. So if students want to wipe down surfaces when they arrive in a bathroom, wipe down surfaces when they leave a bathroom, they can do some of that maintenance for themselves. There will be an option in all of the suites or apartments that have an in-suite bathroom that students would be sharing. They will receive a kit of cleaning supplies and will be able to maintain that space themselves, and will also be able to request support from custodial to schedule a cleaning to support what that individual cleaning would be. We're doing with the residential lounges and other spaces on campus, something very similar of setting the occupancy based on what the number of people who could be in one of those lounges or classrooms or other shared spaces, how many people can safely be present together and still maintain the physical distancing. So when students return to campus, they will find new signage throughout campus indicating how many people can be in a lounge at the same time. We anticipate that there's going to be one-way traffic in stairwells. There will be limited capacity in elevators and one-way traffic in hallways, for example, in the classroom buildings. So all of that signage will be present and available for students to help indicate how they can maintain safety in the physical environment on campus.
Great, thank you, Dean Backegaard. I just want to acknowledge that there are a number of questions coming up in the Q&A that may dive into sort of greater detail for first-year incoming students, and that there will be a webinar next week for a sort of an explicit focus on first-year incoming students. And so want to let people know that we may not get into every question related to first years in this session, but there will be an entire webinar dedicated to incoming first-year students. Director Mansour, I was wondering if you could talk a bit. We've gotten a couple of questions focused on special interest housing, Greek housing. I know there's a range of special interest housing. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how that will work in the fall.
Thank you, Vice President Estes. So the special interest housing was very much a part of the pre-assignment housing that I had spoke to in the past. And we, having all of that information, we are working towards being able to keep those assignments, not necessarily in that accommodation or that request. They may not be in the same exact space, but we are doing our best to keep what the need is and what the desire is at that time. And there is from a perspective of assignments, there will be a priority on the C's accommodations and the assignments of those, but the special interests, we have all that information and we are doing our best to maintain those pre-assignments to the extent that we can within the de-densified units that we have.
Great, thank you so much. I'm wondering, Director Barboza, on dining, we've gotten several questions about the amount of food. And typically in a traditional dining hall and at Brown in the past, there's been an all-you-can-eat buffet, and no one likes an all-you-can-eat buffet more than I do. But I'm wondering, how are we making sure that there will be different amounts of food that students will eat in their daily diets? How are we making sure that students who might want to make sure they're able to eat a bit more are able to accommodate their diets?
Yeah. So the basic entrees will be a substantial portion, and then for those students who feel they need more nourishment, it's all in the amount of the different sides and proteins that they choose on the side. So they choose the entree. That may be adequate for one individual. For another individual, it may mean that I am taking the salad of the day and 2 side grilled chickens and the boiled eggs and the chickpeas. And so I think we're really trying to give them flexibility in choosing the amount of food that goes into that one grab and go takeout bag. We have been continuous dining as has Res Life because we've had some students here. And what we did about 3 weeks into serving the population that remained on campus is we launched a survey, and we learned a lot from the feedback, and we adjusted menu selections and actually portions because of that feedback. We intend to do the same, 3 weeks into the fall, launch a survey and get some feedback from the students to understand, what is working best for them and where they may desire some changes. So we're really committed to that. But initially, that's how we will launch.
Great, thank you, Director Barboza. I'm wondering, Director Mansour, if you could talk a little bit about, there's been a lot of talk about the 3-term model and the potential need for students to, if they have consecutive terms, move in, move out, then be reassigned and move in again. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how Res Life is going to do that. There have been a number of questions in the Q&A about, do we have to move essentially twice if we have consecutive terms? You know, why might that be necessary? I think there's a lack of sort of either information or understanding around that, and was hoping you could provide more.
Thank you, Vice President Estes. So the current assignments that are being done now will be done for the fall semester only. That being said, as we're reviewing all of this, and with the knowledge in particular as it relates to the juniors and the seniors, if there are placements that we can make, that we can somewhat foresee we might be able to maintain for the spring semester, especially knowing that the juniors and the seniors will be remaining both the fall and the spring, we are going to also make every effort with that to maintain it. So as it comes to move out period, if it is determined that we are able to maintain some of those spaces, it is likely those students might not have to do a complete move out at that time.
Great, thank you so much. I know that this was discussed at the health and safety webinar yesterday, but there have been a number of questions in the Q&A and also in the pre-submitted questions. And for those who might not have been able to make it to the previous webinar, I am wondering if either Director Mansour or Dean Bakagard, one of you could talk a little bit about how isolation and quarantine housing will work, and then talk a little bit about how food and dining would work in relationship to that, and if Director Barboza would want to add comments as well.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. As we've mentioned, one of the reasons that we're needing to change students' housing assignments from our original configuration, first is the de-densification, and also is that we will be setting aside certain residence halls to be available for quarantine or isolation housing as we need it. I think this was described in more detail yesterday, but the isolation housing is really for students who we know have tested positive for COVID-19. And our quarantine housing would be for students who have been exposed while we're waiting to find out if they are developing symptoms or would be developing the virus after that exposure. So we have those residence halls set aside and identified, and we work very closely in communication and in collaboration between residential life, between dining services, between health services, and EMS. And we make sure, and student support services as well. We want to be sure that we are aware anytime that a student needs to go into one of those special housing situations, that we're staying in regular contact with those students about how they're doing and making sure that they have their food delivered to them in those locations while they're present. This was something that we had available following the transition to remote learning, because we have had a number of students who have stayed on campus with us for the late spring and summer, and this model has been working well, and we're going to make sure that we are in close contact and coordination with one another in the event that we need to use either the isolation or quarantine options in the fall.
That's a great point. Dean Bakagard clearly articulated what we've been doing, and I would just say that I echo her sentiments. We are committed to that, and we'll continue to do run the program the very same as we open up in the fall.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to, in the last minute or so that we have, thank our panelists for their time and information and expertise today. I want to thank everyone who has joined us for the webinar. I encourage you to continue to think about joining future webinars on more specific topics. There will be a number of them next week. We are here to support you both in the webinar sort of context and outside of it. So please feel free to follow up with the appropriate offices as well, but also know that there is a tremendous amount of information, and it may be more convenient for you in relationship to the Healthy Brown website, FAQs that are available online. So please know that we are doing our best in a range of ways to get as much information to you as we possibly can. In closing, I just wanted to share two very quick thoughts. And I shared them yesterday, so this is a repeat perhaps for some of you. You know, I really am I think an important way appreciative of, if not grateful for, even if some of these things are hard and make things look different, or in some cases preclude the possibility of knowing that public health guidelines and those provided by the federal government, the state, and our medical experts within our own community really are guiding our decisions in terms of our desire to sort of think about housing and dining as things that we can do together in healthy and safe ways. And then finally, as we journey together to the fall, I just want to sort of say, even if we are focused on some things we can't do or have to do differently, that there are going to be a lot of things that we can do in terms of residential community, in terms of community around food, and that we look forward to working with students to really think about what the possibilities are, and to really think about what the fall will look like together in community. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Be safe and well. And for the students, we look forward to seeing you on campus very, very soon. Take care.